Hi, Jeffrey. Thanks for taking time and talking to us today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, I mean, you're one of those few guests who has made a repeat appearance on the show. So, welcome back, I should say.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
I said, welcome back to the show as you've already been on the show earlier as well.
Indeed, I have. I very much enjoyed our previous talk. It must have been a couple of years ago in
Mm.
anti-conventional thinking. So I'm looking forward to this. Um, as I mentioned to you before we went online, the thing of imaginativeness, which we'll be talking about today, is something that's a new concept in my own mind too. So I'm looking forward to our discussion and hopefully formulating my thinking even better.
Super. So the background for this conversation is that I was at a workshop facilitating, and one of the things that we talk about is the importance of imagination in the entire creative process. And people started asking, is there a way that someone can learn to be imaginative? Is there some way that we can become more and more creative as time passes? And I said, yeah, I mean, imagination is an inherently human quality. If you can lie, you can imagine. And came along your newsletter, which by I should say, I've loved getting your newsletters. They're detailed, in depth on a particular topic. So your newsletter comes along, which is around imaginative fullness. So that's a new word that you've coined. So give us a little bit about how did you come up with the word, why, and any backstory there.
Okay, I'd be happy to. Well, as you can work out, imaginativefulness comes from mindfulness, and that is something here in Europe is a growing thing. This notion of mindfulness, of, and I have a small back Buddhism, not a huge background, and but I'm not really a practitioner of mindfulness, but I've read some very good things about it. I've heard some very good things about it. I know many people have been helped by it. But my understanding of mindfulness, and again, this is coming from a completely non-third perspective, is that it's really about being aware of the here and now, seeing, feeling what's around you, observing how you feel about these things, and so on. And I think I can see where that would be a beneficial thing. And I believe that research has shown that the practice of mindfulness can reduce stress and increase perceived health and so on. But it struck me as someone who has an overactive imagination. I mean, your students perhaps complain, ask, how can I be more imaginative? Sometimes I think, how can I be less imaginative? Sometimes I just want to shut this crazy imagination down and just be a bit more neutral. But I realized that this sense that I get into sometimes where my imagination just goes free. And it's a matter, I think, sometimes of looking at the world around you and seeing what's there, imagining the possibilities, all the possibilities in a particular scenario, and allowing your mind to kind of explore and play, basically. And indeed, um, I think imaginativeness is something children do very naturally. When a group of kids come together in your back garden, and suddenly it's no longer the back garden, but it's the surface of Mars, or it's an ocean liner, or it's something else. The kid just go right into that. That's no problem. And I think that demonstrates that anyone with a healthy functioning mind can probably be imaginativeful, probably were imaginativeful in the past, but often study, work, and so on tends to kind of push that away. And most offices are not meant to be imaginativefull. You're meant to focus on what you're supposed to be doing. But I believe people recapture that, and I think it's a matter of, like I say, of, 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 of yeah, it's just looking at things, going for a walk, seeing what's around you, and just thinking about all the possibilities. And a couple of examples come to mind. And one I think I used in that article in Report 103 of Emory Reserve is a while back, I was having a barbecue in that garden, and there were some families coming with some young kids. Now, we have a swing set, with a slide and a couple of swings for kids to play on. But my sons are rather older now; they don't play on it anymore. And I realized that one of the was broken, Now, there's no time to go buy a new seat, and I didn't have the appropriate wood in the house to kind of fashion one myself. So I kind of went for a little walk around the back garden and the garages. For some reason, my house has 4 garages. No self-4 garages, but full of wood and metal and goodness knows what. Sometimes there's a few surprises there. But anyway, I just started looking around and seeing things, and in my head, I would imagine how that would fit into the ropes hanging down with the loops. And I would look at things and I'd say, oh, that's absurd, or that's dangerous, or it would never work. Until eventually there's this, what would that be, about 7 centimeter diameter plastic tubing that I had picked up some time ago to bury some gas cables going from the gas line to the house. And I thought, I could cut a piece of that off. It would fit within the loops for the swing set. And I could envision that in my head. And so I cut the piece and I stuck it in, and it worked. And so I think that's an example of imaginativefulness, is that instead of kind of seeing what was there with me, I was literally, or not literally, but figuratively in my mind, picking things up and visually trying them out. And I think a lot of people do that. I think it's a very natural thing to do something like that, but people don't realize it's being imaginativeful. I think a parent, whose teenage son or daughter goes out in the evening to a party and is late coming home, often becomes imaginative in a very negative way, and they think, "Oh my God, what happened to her?" So I think it does come about. I think that sometimes in the corporate world, there's a tendency to practice sort of negative imaginativefulness. That you might go to your boss and say, "I've got this great idea," and your boss immediately starts thinking about all the risks, all the things that could go wrong. So she is actually being imaginativeful in a very negative way, and she's not really seeing the positive potential of imaginativeness. So I think that kind of defines sort of a more practical use of imaginativeness. Now, another example that comes to mind, and I actually posted this on Facebook, and my friends responded to it. Perhaps you saw it. But a couple of days ago, I was bicycling from my home in Edip Square to the city of Leuven, about 2 kilometers away. And I do this often. And bicycling and walking are great ways to be imaginative. And as I was bicycling along the Daila River, I saw a young man with a fishing pole just standing there like so, and he had a bicycle helmet on. Now, I get that he probably bicycled to go fishing, and okay, understandable, but it was a bit of an anomaly to me. I reckon if someone's going to spend a few hours fishing, they'd probably take their bicycle helmet off and let the wind blow through their hair and so on. So why was he there like that? And my mind, started playing with possibilities. Maybe, maybe he simply forgot. Now, I'm forgetting the possibility that came through my mind.
No, maybe he just wants to have that on his head. He likes having the helmet on his head. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe he's had in the past birds fly and poop on his head. He doesn't want that happen to him. So maybe.
Exactly. That's right. Now it's coming back to my first thought. He was afraid that he would land a really big fish that would hit him on the head. So he wanted the protection of the helmet so the fish wouldn't hurt him. Or maybe he's afraid that if the fish pulled too hard, he'd fall in head first and hit his head on the bank before falling into the river. Maybe he had actually a bicycling on the way there, and he cracked his skull open. And he's afraid that if he took the helmet off, his brains would come out. Now, of course, most people in a scenario like that would probably go seek medical attention. But if you've damaged your brain, you might not be thinking rationally. Maybe he'd been gambling all day and he was bicycling home and he suddenly realized, oh no, my wife told me to dinner tonight. So he found a fishing pole and was quickly trying to catch a fish and run away with it. A friend of mine suggested, because I shared this with some friends, that maybe he didn't have a fishing license and he was afraid police would come along, so he wanted to be able to jump on his bicycle and flee the police as quickly as possible. So this is kind of an example of imaginativeness, is to see something like this that has some kind of anomaly, that something just doesn't make sense, and to let mind play with it. There's there's a number of walks around the village where I live, and at one point there's an old horse and a donkey in the same field. and they often just stand together there like old friends. I've imagined them as being old friends. You kind of wonder what's the friendship between a horse and a donkey like, and do maybe when other horses go past, they laugh at this horse for having a friend as a donkey. I mean, it's like, can't you have a horse friend? But if they do, maybe the old horse doesn't care because this donkey's been with it years now. That it's someone he can probably share his problems with and do stuff together, have a beer at night. This is what imaginativeness is about. I think is to just kind of see what's around you, but instead of focusing on the here and now, focus on all the potential realities, all the potential possibilities that are there. And for me, this is easy, but I should think as I shared this story about the bicycle with other people, as just now with you, you were able to come up with some creative potential reasons for why this is happening. So I think people can do it. It's just a matter of loosening up their thinking. And walking, for example, is a fantastic way to do that. Research out of Stanford University a couple of years ago even showed that people are generally more creative when they're walking. I think it seems that they can make sort of more unusual associations within their brains, and they're less likely to self-criticize when they're walking. There's a kind of defense mechanism in the brain, I guess that's part of the dorsolateral prefrontal region, kind of relaxes when you walk, and so self-criticizing, you kind of build up ideas. So walking, letting your mind run free is a great possibility. Trying to solve a problem by visualizing various solutions in your head is another way to be imaginativeful. In the past, I've explored a little bit with meditation, actually, not myself so much, but with other victims, where I would sort of put people into a kind of meditative state where you start relaxed breathing and then, relax your body through. I think the process if you ever tried meditation. And then I will actually walk people through a scenario. A particular problem they're trying to solve. So, I once they're kind of in this relaxed meditative state, I say, okay, now I want you to start walking, through your mind. What does it look like? How does it feel? How does it smell? Until eventually you come up to whatever this is, whatever the situation or scenario is. And then I, tell people to walk around it, to walk through it, to, fly over it, to make it very small, and to do all kinds of things with it. And afterwards, people are often astounded by the kind of observations they make because they're not used to kind of this playful approach to looking at a situation. They tend to be very analytical and focused, and that's great when you need to be analytical and focused, but it's really crap when it's to being creative, being imaginativeful.
So is this what could potentially be the problem when people in a corporate setting complain that we are not able to be creative, we are not able to come up with ideas, or is the lack of play or the lack of a sense of freeness? So for example, yesterday I was teaching design thinking to someone, and we are trying to solve a particular problem, and we said, okay, this is the problem for this particular user, which is like all of us who travel in a train, and I wanted every one of them to come up with at least 20 ideas in 10-15 minutes, and the most that someone could come up with was about 15, and 9 of them were derivative of a single idea, and most of them were in the range of 3 to 5, and they were struggling to even come up with more ideas, more than 4 or 5 ideas. And this is something that they have experienced it so many times. Train travel is something that you've experienced so many times, and if you were to think, it should be very simple for them to come up with ideas, but they struggle. So what could potentially be the struggle, cause of the struggle, do you think?
Well, in the corporate, I think there's a few things that cause the struggle. You said this was on a train, though. You said, is that correct?
So the problem that we were trying to come up with, or the ideas that we were to come up with, was how do we improve the experience of passengers traveling in a train?
Okay. Probably one of the things you could have done would have been to have got on a train under the circumstances. I think probably the least creative place in the entire world is your office desk. And the second least creative space in the entire world is your office meeting room. So this is part of the problem. And there's actually some research came out of organization in England years ago. I can't remember who did it. But they actually found that people really did report that they had the most trouble coming up with ideas at their office desk. Now, I work in a home office. I have a nice view of the countryside here, but it's not a very creative place for me. I get up and away from my desk when I need to be creative. So part of just that, I think, it's such a familiar place that there's not really new inspiration at your desk. Most people spend way too much time at their desk. This research I was telling you about from Stanford showed that just the simple sitting or walking within an enclosed space, so not even an inspiring walk, people were still full creative when they're walking. I think just that's things like that helps. Sitting seems to be detrimental to creativity and imagination. So that's probably the biggest problem right there. The second is most organizations have very structured approaches, structured ways of thinking. It's interesting if you work in a large company, or in the worst case scenario, I worked in the European Commission for a couple of years, so a huge bureaucratic organization. And it was interesting sometimes to see someone creative who came into the organization, and initially they're just flowing with ideas, and eventually they get beat down as, no, we don't do things that way here, or you need to do this, that's something else to get your idea approved. And they soon learn that these ideas aren't going to work, and this is how you think, and this is how you solve problems. And they sadly kind of become another cog in the corporate world. And so that, I think, focuses thinking. And okay, to be honest, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, most organizations aren't meant to be just producing creativity. They have processes that need to be followed. And if people are all over the place with crazy ideas, nothing would get done. So I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing in general, but it is a bad thing when you need to be creative. So the thing you could really do in a situation like that would be, well, in a normal scenario, I would say get out and go for a walk. Get the team out and go for a walk. If there's a nice garden or park somewhere nearby, or even say just go for a walk and do a walking meeting and ask the same question. I think you'll find that people have many more ideas. Now, I also find, and I think that others have said the same thing, that train travel is actually a good way for thinking. To sit in the train and at a gentle clunk, 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 clickety clack of the train ride and watching scenery go past is very inspiring. And I even remember a few years ago, Amtrak, the American train network, created a kind of a guest author where they would invite authors to come and give free, tickets. They could sit in the train and write whilst watching the world go past. And I've done that too, actually, writing on trains. So train travel can be very inspiring. And as it was also relevant to the problem at hand, I would have said, get everyone on a train, take an hour train ride somewhere, go for a walk, have a snack, take a train back, and on the train ride, actually ask them the same question. I think you would find that you would have a lot more ideas flowing. And what could also be good, particularly if you're the team leader, would be to try it yourself and come up with some really crazy ideas. Because once you do that, you're also telling people crazy ideas are okay. I'm the team leader. I've just said something that's completely outrageous. So if I can do that, you can do that too. And I think that helps open people up in a kind of a corporate team environment.
I mean, I think what you're saying also indicates that the environment that you are in has a large impact or a big impact on the way you think and work as well. So, which also leads us to how do we design and how do we design the environment that we lead our lives in, whether it is at home, whether it is in office, whether it is in the during the travel that we do. So, for example, if you're traveling in a car, two-way to your office, back and forth, spending almost about 3 hours in the car, it is important that you design the environment inside of the car as well, based on what it is that you want to accomplish in that car. So, if it is just listening to music and just going back and forth, that's okay. But if you want that journey to be used for reflection, if you want that journey to be used for, let's say, connecting the dots, then you need to design the environment inside of your car in such a way that it actually not only allows you to reflect and think and connect the dots, but also maybe in a way triggers you to do so. Same goes with your work and your home environment as well.
So, I mean, cars are a bit difficult because one of my number one rules of creativity is to have a notebook at hand. So if I have an idea, I can write it down because I have a terrible memory, and I know that don't write it down, I will forget ideas. But even people with a good memory, I think it's really important because often ideas come from strange connections that you might make. Well, maybe you're driving along the road and you see something strange, and that makes a connection to a work problem. Say, aha, and the problem's there. But if you don't write it down, that connection passes by. It's very possible you lose that connection. It's important to be able to write things down. Unfortunately, unless you're in a traffic jam, you can't write whilst driving. At least not now. In 10 years from now, with self-driving cars, that may be a completely different story. But right now, so yeah, I find it hard, and also just having to focus on the roads, I find it hard to think as creatively whilst driving as I do while bicycling, which is one reason why I tend to bicycle anywhere that's within 20 kilometers or so, if I possibly can, or public transportation. Riding on trains, buses, because that allows me to think. It allows me to write things down. I don't have to worry about the distractions of the the road, and people walking in front of me, sticking to the limit, things like that. The advantage of a traffic jam is you have lots of time to think and write things down. But for me, I just got insanely frustrated by traffic jams, and that can. I often have very homicidal thoughts about other drivers rather than productive thoughts. But yes, indeed, you can create an environment that's perhaps inspiring in your car, particularly if you are going to be there a long time, maybe in traffic jams. And indeed, if self-driving cars become the norm, as seems very likely in the next 10 or 20 years, then you can, put on a beautiful piece of music, lay back, and be more creative. Likewise, the office environment. But in addition to that, it's also important to change. No matter, like I say, I have the privilege of being able to work from home. I live in a village in the countryside, so it's very peaceful here. But my desk basically looks the same from one day to the next. So it's not a very inspiring place for ideas. And this is why I get up and go somewhere else. I go for a walk every day or a bicycle ride every day to be creative, to think about things, as well as, of course, the exercise potential. Or sometimes, I just physically go to another chair and table to draw or to write. Sometimes I use drawn writing to kind of map out. It's not mind mapping, it's more kind of doodling, drawing problems or drawing ideas and stuff like that. And getting away from this is a big start. So it is absolutely important to have the right environment. I understand a lot of companies in Silicon Valley are playing with that kind of thing of having game rooms and dance rooms even where you can put on headphones and dance to music that no one else can hear. That's probably good stuff. I've never experienced. I haven't really read any research on it, but I would assume that having that kind of thing in the office space would indeed help you kind of get away from the desk and change your thinking and be more imaginative, Paul.
So that brings me to the next question. You do note down some thoughts on how someone can actually enter this state of imaginativefulness, as you call it. So how can someone deliberately, let's say for example, on demand, get into that stage or state of mind where you are more imaginative, where you are more playful, where you are more, creative?
That's a good question. That's something that's a part of this whole thing I need to work on. For me, it's relatively easy. So, but obviously for a lot of people it isn't. That's something I need to work on. I believe that going for a walk, it doesn't have to be the countryside. The city is fine too. The advantage of the city is there's a lot more going on. So you have a lot more input coming to you and stuff to play with. So I think going for a walk is very good. It's also worth thinking about where you have your best ideas. If you ask people, where do you have your best ideas? Some people will say walking. Some people will say the shower. Some people will say in the bath. Some people will say, working in my garden. Whatever that is, probably a place where you can be imaginative. It's a place where clearly your mind lets down its defenses a bit and you think more freely. So if that's the case, then take a long shower or go out in the garden or whatever. That's probably a good place to do it. I find that classical music can help me. I think the danger with popular music is the lyrics, basically, that you can get caught up in the lyrics. And if it's a song about love, and as most pop songs seem to be, then you're likely to think in that direction, which isn't going to be helpful if you're trying to come up with a new idea for improving passenger journeys on trains, unless it involves love and sex. But that's probably not where you're trying to go. So yeah, I think classical music or instrumental music, as opposed to music with lyrics, can help kind of take you in different directions. And in fact, I have a friend of mine, a concert violinist, and a few years ago at the Imagination Club in Belgium, which is a group that sort of experiments with workshops and things like that. We did a workshop in which it was a walk in your imagination with Johann Sebastian Bach, and basically I talked a little bit about problems. I had everyone write down a problem or something that was bothering them, and then to fold it up and hold it in their hand, and then did this kind of, get into a meditative state. But here I said, okay, now we're going to walk down this corridor, and at the end of the corridor is a big wooden door, and you're going to walk through the wooden door, and there Johann Sebastian Bach is going to take you on a journey in your imagination. At this point, Olga, the violinist, started playing Bach's sonatas, and some of the people in the group had profound. Afterwards, this was completely experimental. So afterwards, I asked, how did that work for you? And one guy just held up 2 A4 sheets of paper full of writing. So at the end of it, I said, okay, I'm sorry, we're going to head myself. At the end of it, then I brought people out of it. I said, okay, now if you need to write things down, this is the time to do it before it goes away. So you had going to meditative state, you had about 10, 15 minutes of Bach's violin sonatas, played by a live violinist. And then you had another 10, 15 minutes of writing things down. Yes, okay, a couple of people said, no, it didn't work for me, but I love the music. Fair enough. But a few people had really profound results. So I think, that just goes to show that classical music can help. I think I'm not an expert on meditation. I experiment with it a bit and kind of leading people into meditative states. But I think it is a state that can allow you to be more imaginative, particularly if you kind of bring a situation with you as you go into the meditative state, because that kind of, again, your mind kind of frees up. So I think those things can help. Hate to say it, but alcohol can help too. And there has been research that has shown that a drink or two increases creativity, and it seems to be basically that alcohol reduces inhibitions, which can have disastrous results if you have too much alcohol, as probably most anyone who's ever had too much alcohol knows from experience. But having 1 or 2 beers, enough to kind of relax the mind a bit, but not to the point where you're getting drunk, can reduce inhibition. So again, if you're comfortable with drinking, I'm not saying that people who don't drink should suddenly start drinking or to encourage drinking, because I also have friends who are alcoholics. I know it is very bad to know that is. But if you're okay with drinking, having a glass of wine or two, or beer or two, or whiskey or whatever, can help bring you into that state. So things like this can help. But to be honest, this is something I really need to explore more with people who find it more challenging to get into an imaginative state. I suspect certain kinds of inspiration can help. Again, if you're doing a group of people, if the leader can kind of come up with some really strange stuff, that kind of frees people to think more wildly. But this is, to be honest, something I need to explore more, is how people, I can help, but also how people themselves can learn to put themselves into an imaginative state when they need to be.
So some of the practices that we've spoken about, which is meditation, walking, listening to classical music, taking inspiration from something that is around you, or you're going into a state where you think about certain things and then allow your mind to wander. So these are all things that I think we can practice on a regular basis as well, right? Not necessarily. So this is something like what my grandmother used to say, is that you need to dig the well when you don't need the water. If you only go and start digging when you need water, you'll die of thirst. So if you are in a role where on an ongoing basis you are required to be creative, to be imaginative, you need to start practicing and you need to start building that well much ahead of time, so that when that moment comes, when you need to be creative and you need to be in your best possible state of mind, you are able to be there because you've already done all the hard work. I think that's perfectly suits what you're trying to say as well.
That's awesome. I just told you I write down ideas. I'm gonna write down your grandma's statement because that's perfect.
So, is there anything else that you have seen work for you? I mean, I should tell you that not only do I read the newsletters you send out, I look at the drawings that you put in those newsletters. I mean, first of all, your newsletters are really long, detailed, full of information, and then you have this picture, which is both funny, wacky, and covers everything that you've written in the single image. I mean, if you don't read anything, the entire post fully, you just read what is there in the image, that's more than sufficient to get a gist of what the entire article is about. So, plus, add to that, I think one of the most engaged posts on Facebook that I've seen is yours. So, you put out a question, you put out something, and there are some 15 people or 20 people responding to that. I have not seen, at least not in my friend circle, not in the people that I know of, who can consistently get 25, 30 people to react to something that they put out on Facebook. Yeah, like, share maybe, but not actually respond to those queries. And at times I find that the questions that you pose are also like something which is which you don't normally encounter in our day-to-day stuff, or at times they are so common that we miss or we gloss over them in our lives. So I wanted to understand what is your practice in terms of to be in such a state where you're able to, number one, you're able to write, you're able to draw, you're able to prompt these guys to get the kind of responses that you get.
Writing and drawing come rather natural to me. Those are my skills. And my eldest son is brilliant in sciences. He can't draw at all. My younger son draws very well. I mean, it's just some people have skills more so than others. And I guess you grew up in a time when we didn't have the internet. I was born in America at a time when there was like 6 or 7 television channels, which were really boring during the daytime. And as a teenager, moved to England, where there were only 3 channels at the time. And it was in my late teens that my parents invested in a very primitive Atari, video game set. But there were distractions. So when I was a kid, I read and I drew, and so I loved reading, especially science fiction. And I love drawing, and so I think these are just skills that I have that I have exploited. Obviously, the skills that I don't have, I kind of try and hide, so I come up with feeling rather competent. And my life partner would probably say taking care of my partner and social skills are a weakness of mine. But anyway, I mean, we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and two of my strengths happen to be the cartooning and writing, which comes from years of experience. I've been writing on and off professionally for, dear me, 30 years or so now. So that comes rather naturally. I always had an overactive imagination, activation, a realization at a certain point in my life that other people like me in that sense. And I always have having crazy ideas comes very naturally to me all the time. But people start saying, where do these ideas come from? And I did art and university sculpting, so people would sort of refer to that. And I also did some video work. And where do these ideas come from? How do you think of this stuff? And to me, they just happen. I don't know. But you have to realize that a few years ago, well, actually more than a few years ago, about a dozen years ago or so, as the businesses became more interested in innovation and creativity, that if I could kind of understand better what's happening in my head and share that information, that would actually be something that people would find valuable. What I've been trying to do over this period of time. So, combine the ability to draw with some competence, the ability to write with some competence, with no overactive imagination. It's not really difficult for me to do this kind of stuff. What's difficult for me can often be very focused, detailed work. I did, years ago I lived in Bangkok, and I did some translation work from Thai to English, and that's really difficult because I didn't want to write what someone else had written. I wanted to write my own thing. So I guess that's where that comes from. In terms of Facebook, I don't know. I honestly don't know. 'Cause sometimes I try posting questions like that on Twitter, nothing. On LinkedIn, sometimes I find out how the cartoon and I'm just the right level of provocative, people will respond, but not to the extent that they do on Facebook. And I love that, and I find it fascinating because I have lived internationally. I've got a collected friends internationally too, and I have, amongst Facebook friends, many of whom, I've most, well, no, I say how I've actually met in real life, and others, goodness knows where they've come from. Um, uh, but because it's an international group and a multicultural group, and there are, even in religions, there are Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and Christians and atheists and goodness knows what else there. You just get such a wide variety of responses from people, and I find that so inspiring that I do ask questions. I get all kinds of insight, and for me, that's really useful. So I don't understand why people respond to these questions, except that I try and make the questions about them rather than being about me, because in general, people like talking about themselves. But I just love the fact that people do respond and do respond with variety.
So you also wrote this newsletter around status quo. Don't trust the status quo, right? So we are talking about imagination, and I think it is relevant when it comes to imagination also to talk about status quo, because imagination is actually you or someone trying to shake up the status quo. So
Yeah.
so what are your thoughts on status quo? And so there are times when status quo is good enough. Then there are times when you need to shake things up, right? So
Yeah.
if you, I don't know whether we discussed about this earlier when we spoke, but I personally feel that there are two phases of any business. One phase is for a business to figure out what it needs to do over the
Mm-hmm.
next period of time, and once they find that out, they enter into the second phase where they need to eliminate everything else and become efficient in terms of doing exactly that. And that kind
Mm-hmm.
of comes to an end at some point in time, and then they again need to figure out what next. And again, once they figure out, then again they go out all out in terms of efficiently executing that. So there is this balance, and there is this duality of business that I think of, and I see businesses go through. And there is a status quo required when you are in the efficiency mode, where you're execute. But then what happens is, in that mode, once you move from that mode to becoming the creative mode, you carry along with you the status quo, and then you struggle, right? So how, number one, how do we know? I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'd love to have your perspective as well. How do we know that we are now no longer the efficiency mode works for us? So we need to move into the creative and exploration mode. And once we decide to move into that mode, how do we ensure that the entire thing around process efficiency and the status quo is kind of left behind, and we are in a mode where we are ready to challenge the status quo, where we are ready to express, we are ready to explore and be imaginative. Have you thought in terms of these things, and what would you advise someone who's struggling in this way?
Wow. Okay, that requires a bit of thought. Now, you have to. I know I've got, having written about not trust the status quo. I believe I also dug into a bit of research on the topic, but it's not clear, and it's not my memory right now. But yeah, indeed, people tend to, there tends to be a status quo bias. People tend to follow the status quo. If they're uncertain about what to do, you follow the status quo. And I think that's often drilled into people. And I think in that article I referred to my own thought. One of the strange my father did, which I realized much later in life, is he never compared me or my brothers to people. It's never, your brother did much better in history than you. What's wrong with you, Jeffrey? Or, oh my God, the neighbors have a BMW, we've got the Mercedes. He just didn't care about this stuff. And I think that in part of him because he's high functioning autistic, but that's beside the point. Kind of brought me up not comparing myself to others, not comparing myself to the status quo, which I think has given me a huge freedom, which sadly my father passed away. We could thank him for that. But yeah, there's a tendency tends to be a bias towards the status quo, and people often become comfortable if it's pushed too far from the status quo. And again, this tends to be the status quo defines appropriate behavior. It defines, how, if you and I meet each other, we probably shake hands. In person, we've actually talked a few times, exchanged emails and so on, but we've never actually met face to face. But we do, we shake hands and follow certain things that were according to the status quo, and that's good. I mean, if I came up to you with a warm look and you came up to me with like a Thai style Y or something like that, it would be a mess. But the status quo ensures that when we meet face to face, things would, be rather smooth and we kind of move into a meaningful conversation. So there's a lot of good things about the status quo, but if you become overly reliant on it in terms of creativity, if you want to act the status quo, that tends to be the opposite of creativity, which is veering away from the status quo. In terms of how companies can do that, that is really difficult. It's something I would probably think about, but my instinctive response is what probably would make more sense for a company is to have go for a variety of people rather than trying to change how people think, which is really difficult. So you might have, an team of 10 people, for example, 7 or 8 are kind of status quo followers. That they're good with that. That's where they're comfortable, fine. And you get a couple of eccentric rebels who tend to veer away from the status quo. And to some extent, so the status quo people will be following the status quo. The other people will be questioning stuff on a regular basis, maybe come up with ideas, even when you don't necessarily want to be. That can still be useful because maybe you create a strategic goal and you're kind of following along like this, and someone would say, well, why are you doing it that way when if you do it this way, you can do it at half the cost and 20% less time or something like that. So even when you're meant to be kind of very focused, people kind of with outside thinking, I think, can bring in ways of improving what you're doing. Then when it's time to rethink things, then you might put these people in kind of the crazy thinkers more in charge of the free thinking, and that will be my approach. Instead of trying to force people to do the way they think, I think it's really difficult and it tends to make people uncomfortable. Which if you have someone who's used to following the status quo, and you say, okay, I want you to be crazy for the next 6 months, that's probably going to panic and even stick closer to the status quo. So I think the variety of people would be a more effective approach. And that gets into a whole other thing that I've written about, and I think irritates me. I sense that companies say, oh, we want creative people and so on, and yet profile. If you want a new marketing person for marketing, look for someone who's 5 or 10 years, an MBA from a known university, so many years of marketing experience, and some of that experience should be in a similar company. Well, people are probably extremely talented, but they're not necessarily they probably won't bring new thinking to the organization because they're, just like everyone else. Whereas you bring in someone, from another country who's done different things, she's going to have a very different perspective. She's going to bring new thinking to an organization. So I think that also hits another problem with the organizations is they should actually make it a practice to hire a few crazy people. Not too many, but a few of them. But you also then need to create an environment where they don't go even crazier themselves.
Interesting. So, Jeffrey, now I'd like to come, shift gears a little bit and try to ask some questions that I tend to ask some of my guests over the period of time. So, is there any book, piece of art, or a movie that you've seen in the recent past that has had an enormous amount of impact on you? And if yes, why?
Oh, dear me. Look, what a... I've just read a couple of interesting, but I have a huge problem. What have I read recently? There's a couple books. One of the interesting things, maybe I'll answer that slightly differently. One of the things I've been consciously trying to, I read a lot. I'm kind of a compulsive reader. I probably do a novel a week. I read The Economist regularly. I read the news, other stuff. I'm a compulsive reader. one of the things I've constantly been trying to do is read more women authors within you know, within the realm of fiction. Tend to be, particularly historically, far more male authors than female authors. So I'm constantly trying to read female authors whose books focus on female main characters. To kind of, and I find that it's giving me a new perspective on things. Because I say most of as a science fiction reader when I was younger, and so many of those books are written by male authors. But yeah, if you look in a library, in a bookshop, particularly in fiction, it's a lot more male authors than female authors. That is starting to change. And it's kind of strange because I think I've read research that shows women tend to be bigger readers than men, particularly of fiction. So it's kind of strange. But indeed, it has been very enlightening. Now, unfortunately, I can't think of the titles or even the authors of a couple of the more interesting books I've read. If I think about it, I could send you an email later, but I really can't think of anything. But just that kind of different train in my reading has been inspiring, and it's helped me, I think, understand things from a more female perspective. I find that absolutely fascinating. Well, no, I've not been to a new art museum in a while now. I need that. I've revisited the ones in Belgium, and yeah, it's been a while since I've been to a new art museum. So I have to say that recent influences, it's basically that's within the reading.
Super. So, do you have certain routines or certain habits that you do every single day, which help you in the work that you put out?
Yeah, there's two which I've mentioned already. One is almost every day. I go for a walk or a bicycle ride of at least 45 minutes, sometimes more. And that's partly I work in a home office, so my commute is basically from upstairs to downstairs. It's not much of a commute. So partly it's like getting some exercise, and it's energy management because I have a lot of energy, and if I just sit in a chair all day, I'd explode, and that would be bad for everyone. So it's partly for the exercise, but it's also it's when I think, and sometimes I'll go out for a walk if something. I need there's a problem that's troubling me, or I'm looking for an idea for an article for Report 103 or something like that. Sometimes I just go out for a walk and just my mind is all over the place, and that's okay. Sometimes I go for a bicycle. Usually a bicycle ride is more practical. As I say, I live in a village, so Leuven's a near city. It's about 12 kilometers away. Brussels is about 20 kilometers away. If I have business there, I'll often bicycle for the exercise. Occasionally I'll just bicycle pleasure. But walking, of course, don't have to pay as much attention to what's going on walking as you do bicycling, let alone in a car. But mind you, do have to be careful. Once some years ago, I was so caught up in my thinking with going for a walk. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, your picture's frozen. That's why I was asking. I was so deep in thought that as I was walking, suddenly something hit me in the face. Pow! And I sort of looked up, and I'd actually walked right into a signpost, and nose first. And I broke my nose. So it is a little bit dangerous to be too caught up when you're walking. The thing, as I said, is I carry a notebook with me at all times, so I write down notes if I have them. I've also what I've learned relatively recently is to manage my day according to the kind of energy and creativity I have. For example, I tend to be most creative at night, but I'm least kind of focused. In the mornings, I'm less creative, but I'm very focused. So generally, I'll get down ideas at night and write them in the morning, and that's very productive. And I actually discovered a lot of authors and writers do exactly the same thing, that somehow the morning is best for that kind of thing. Afternoon is, I don't know, I'm probably least useful in the afternoon, so that's most likely when I'll go for the walk or the bicycle to do some errands. And in the evenings, I start to have more ideas. Late at night ideas, I don't want to work at night, but I tend to make notes or scribble drawings and things like that to keep that going. So managing my day according to my energy has been very helpful habit. Those are the helpful ones. I mean, I have not normal ones like how much coffee I drink and when I eat meals, but that I don't think by as creativity. That's just sort of normal human human habits.
So tell us a little bit about Report 103. I mean, I've been getting it for almost, I think, 4.5 years, more than that, if I remember correctly. So how long have you been doing that, and how many subscribers you have? What kind of responses do you get from people? Why do you keep doing that? I mean, you've been doing that for such a long period of time.
A very long period of time, since 2004. So, as far as I know, it is the longest running newsletter, blog, or whatever on innovation. Um, I've never come across anything longer. Chuck Frey, you may know, had a newsletter that had been going. It started before Report 103, but sadly he stopped. It was a very good newsletter. He because he wasn't so involved in innovation himself. I thought it was interesting that he didn't have the kind of biases that I have and other people have who are writing their own newsletters. Innovation Tools, that was called. So it's been the longest running newsletter. Now, I do it and why I continue to do it is comes down to in around 2003, I left a very bureaucratic and boring organization where I've been working, and I had this idea to build an idea management software. And I started building it, and it's, like a lot of entrepreneurs, I'm overly optimistic, and I have this sort of Chinese entrepreneur approach from living in Thailand for 10 years is you jump first and then you look, rather than looking first, which I think tends to be more sort of the Europeans probably spend too much time looking and worrying. The Americans look and then jump, and it's a bit of all of that. But I kind of dove in and started the software, and then I realized, here I am, I'm building an idea management software, basically a tool that would allow managers and organizations to launch challenges. In what ways might we improve our banking tools? And then people can submit ideas, they can collaborate on ideas, and then there's evaluation tools and so on. There's a number of software products like that out there now. I started developing it, but I realized belatedly that, in order to sell to large companies, idea management software is only into a company that has a few hundred employees. Small companies, you don't need software, you sit down and you talk. Here I was a small company, basically a one-man show, outsourcing, living in a small village in a small country, trying to convince big companies to trust me and my software. And I belatedly realized that wasn't going to be easy. And but I guess from experience, that newsletters are a very powerful tool, and much more so then, because now everyone has a newsletter. You write a blog and you have to have a newsletter. But at that time, there are far fewer newsletters about. And so the idea was basically to demonstrate expertise. So people, this guy knows what he's doing, he's trustworthy, probably his software is okay too. And it took me a little flipping around a bit, and the first few issues were kind of focusing on existing art, linking to existing articles and commentary. But I eventually, built a bit of self-confidence and started writing my own opinions and thoughts on it and so on. And it very quickly gained a following. A lot of people joined up. As I say, there really wasn't much else at that time. And this was before now that there's too many newsletters out there. And it built up quite a following. Now it's got, I don't know, about 7,000-8,000 subscribers. It's not huge, but it's definitely a subscriber base. And why do I keep doing it? Going back to a very pragmatic marketing business, but I would say that a substantial amount of the business I get now, as you know, but people listening to this might not know, I left the software business some years ago. I've always said I've been an entrepreneur a big chunk of my life, and one or another self-employed. And I said there's basically three reasons to start a business: either to have fun, earn a lot of money, or ideally both. And I realized with software I was not having fun. And once the company started earning money, around 2008, when you had the banking collapse, business collapsed as well. And so I wasn't making money anymore either, and I didn't feel like building up the business again. So I pulled out and focused on writing books and speaking, doing workshops, that kind of thing. But over the years, probably 3/4 of the business I've done has started at What 103. Someone will say, that article you wrote about challenges innovation managers face really read with me, Jeffrey. I'd like you to come in and do a workshop with my team for our annual innovation meeting in Krakow or whatever. So purely just for the business it brings in, that's a good reason to continue it. But it also helped me to do is to define my own thinking, especially early on. Now I've been doing this for a lot longer, and I have kind of defined my thinking. But to actually have to write about something is is a very good way to define your thinking. And okay, obviously getting experience, which I was doing as I was implementing the software for clients and giving them training and giving them advice and so on, and the questions they asked. I also must say I kind of lost my content idea management software brings value. That's another reason to get out of the business. And so as I was doing training workshops and also then the questions that people asked me, the feedback that they gave me in the newsletter, inspired me. People would ask me questions, and I started to write answers. And I realized, hey, this is actually a good article. So I kind of write the answer in an email, and I edit it slightly and post it as an article. And it's been, in addition to that, probably how you and I met each other is through the newsletter. So I've met some, I've met friends, professional associates, and so on. So it's brought a lot of benefits to me that makes it well worth the time it takes to put it together and put it out.
So you've also recently released an online course, right? So what is it all about, and how can people, who is it intended for, and how can people join?
It's basically intended for innovation managers. Most of the people I've worked with over the years in terms of creativity have been innovation managers, often middle to senior level managers in larger organizations who've been put in charge of innovation, and maybe they're feeling a little bit lost. They're looking for help, and they, often they find my website, subscribe to the newsletter, and so on. And so the idea here was, for these people, they face a lot of challenges. I mean, one of the positive things is very often the CEO chooses them directly. They often have a more direct line to the CEO than they would normally have. And very often, almost always, these innovation managers are playing two roles. They might be an R&D manager and an innovation manager, or a marketing manager and an innovation manager, and so on. But one of the positive things, they generally have a direct connection to the CEO. One of the biggest challenges they tend to face is they have the remit to develop ideas, to capture ideas. One positive thing is they have a budget now. Now, in the early days of 2004, they often made innovation managers. They didn't actually have any budget. They'd contact me with questions and say, well, I got to go ask my boss. I wouldn't hear from them again. Or they'd say, yeah, I'd follow up and they'd say, oh, well, we have a budget and maybe next year or whatever. Now they have a budget, so they can buy idea management software. They can hire me to do things. One of the biggest challenges that they tend to face is the implementation of ideas, because we'll have the authority from the CEO to do these things, to encourage creativity, to encourage innovative thinking. They don't have the authority to approve ideas. So I might be an innovation manager. You might have an absolutely awesome idea, but I really don't. I'm a combination marketing manager, innovation manager. Your idea is a production-related idea, and I just do not have the wherewithal to prove the idea. The best I can do is sort of send it to Mary, who's the in charge of this. But if she's not interested, she's not interested. So they often hit a wall where they can capture ideas, but they can't implement it. And this is like the number one frustration of many people I've spoken with, is they've got loads of ideas, but the creativity level is rather low, and I think you expressed your own challenges there, and I think face the same kind of thing, is trying to get people to be creative in an uncreative environment where they meant to be focused. So that is one problem, is getting people to be truly creative. But the other problem is actually implementing ideas. And when ideas aren't being implemented, then of course people become demotivated. Why should I have time on Jeffrey's innovation initiative when nothing's going to happen? My idea will get lost eventually. But also, of course, the people are put in charge of innovation, professionals are confident people, and they feel a certain frustration that they can't actually see this through. Often CEOs seem to be keener on talking innovation than really doing innovation. And of course, innovation ultimately involves risk, really innovative idea. The iPhone's a great example. I mean, the amount of money Apple invested in the iPhone, if that had commercial failure, it might have bankrupted Apple, or certainly would have been disastrous to the company. But it was a success. And so it did very well. Now, it helps that it was the brainchild of the CEO of Apple at the time, but CEOs are understandably reluctant to invest huge amounts of money in ideas that are untested, particularly if it's not their own brainchild, but coming from some crazy guy in accounting or whatever. That's one of the challenges they face. And secondly, if you do implement ideas, that often involves change, and people generally do not like change, especially over which they have no control. So, if it's suddenly announced that there's going to be huge changes in the way the product is produced, that tends to scare people. And so there's a lot of reasons why, innovation initiatives tend to die somewhere in the middle without ideas being implemented. But there's a huge frustration there. The other thing, of course, is how to measure the value of an innovation initiative, particularly as ideas are not being implemented. Could you, as an innovation manager, prove to your CEO that you are actually generating some kind of real value, which we have is a collection of ideas at some level of implementation. And if an idea does go through and it is developed by, say, the R&D department, then you as the innovation manager are probably less likely to be credited with it than the R&D department that actually implements the idea. So this addresses some of those challenges. I guess another problem that I think a problem that a lot of innovation managers face of their own doing is that they're too desperate to try and bring innovative ideas, and what they really need to do is focus on the strategic vision of the organization. If you look at the companies that are highly innovative in the world, they look at Apple, Apple corporate pages, Google corporate pages, Facebook corporate pages, and one word you don't actually see very much, if at all, is innovation and innovative. They're focused on these sort of strategic visions and perceive innovation simply as a tool that gets them there. Companies, if you look at HP, Lenovo, whatever, can have innovation all over their corporate websites because, they're all about, they're doing innovation perhaps all over the place, but rather than focusing on a vision, it's a little bit here, a little bit there. That doesn't really help so much as focusing on the vision. So, and another important thing innovation managers need to do is to learn how to focus on that vision. And if that vision doesn't exist, because a lot of companies don't really have a focused strategic vision, they may actually have to be so audacious as to create a vision. Now, they can't call it the corporate strategic vision, but they can call it an innovation vision or so on. So the course basically covers some of this stuff to help innovation managers go to a level where they're less focused on generating lots of ideas and more focused on generating relevant ideas that are aligned with strategy, and then also creating strategies to make it easy to sell these ideas to the decision-making managers who can actually make them happen. So that's what the course covers. If you go to creativejeffrey.com, my site, there's a link there. You click on the link, your services link, whatever, and you'll find it. You sign up, give me a little bit of information, and the course is free. And you're also, it's videos, it's text, there's questions, and so on. You're also welcome to contact me at any point. My contact information is on every page of the course. You can contact me with questions or feedback, and so on.
Super. So I think we've already reached the end of our time. So thanks a lot for taking time and talking to me today. It was fun as was the last time. And can you just tell people where they can reach you if they want to reach you?
Well, as I say, the way creativejeffrey.com, Jeffrey, Jefrey, one word.com, is the website. You can find me. There's contact form, there's loads of articles there, there's the cartoons and so on. If you want to contact me directly, Jeffrey@creativejeffrey.com is my email address. I would hear from anyone who got a question, got feedback, want to share something. That sort of thing is so inspirational to me. So I would love to hear from anyone who's listening to this.
Super. Thanks a lot and have a good day.